Alrighty, we're doing Politician Week, right? And today we're gonna do a little bit of a story time, right? A little bit of my experience, and we're gonna wrap it all into this topic we have here. Um, so one thing to set up this story is that my dad, growing up, was a pastor. And so, in a way, I kind of saw politics throughout my life, right? They were church politics. You know, the I would see my dad and he would have an opinion, and the other pastors at the church would have a different opinion, and the pastors and the deacons and everyone would disagree, and then they'd have to resolve it. And I kind of got a little bit of a behind the scenes look at that kind of stuff, even from a relatively young age. Obviously, the younger I was, the more kind of kept away and kept secret this kind of inside baseball was. But fundamentally, there is one dynamic that I kept seeing time and time again, and I'm very glad that seeing my dad, he pretty much always was on the right side of this dynamic as far as I can tell. But most of the type of stuff that there was lots of back and forth about, and usually it's about little things, so it's not like it was a huge deal, but it builds up, right? But fundamentally, my dad's position was that we should make room for people at the church. And what I mean by that is that at the church, it should be run by the people at the church, that they should be doing stuff, involved, making things happen. Not because, free labor, right? Psh, no. It's because as a pastor, he knew that what those people needed was purpose, meaning, a home. And when they went to his church, that's what that was supposed to be for them. It was supposed to give them purpose, so that way they could build themselves up and become more than they were before. Give them meaning, so they can make sense of all the crazy stuff that goes on in the world. And give them a home, a community to feel secure in, so that way they can go out into that world and make a difference, to bring more people to Christ, to build up our communities and make them more prosperous and more fun, more good. And the alternative to that is not, we would just want to exclude everyone and keep everyone away. No, the alternative was also well-meaning, but slightly misplaced. Because what would often happen is, this is the argument. Logistically, this would be easier. That if we just had a guy do it, then we wouldn't need to get volunteers all the time, right? So much easier, problem solved. We always have to go constantly asking people, can you help out on Monday? Can you help out on Tuesday? Can you help out on Saturday? Can you help out on Sunday? Like, there's so much stuff going on that if you just constantly have to ask for volunteers, for people to be involved in all this stuff, it's draining, it's hard, it's just a lot of stuff. But without those people that do get involved, that do volunteer, there is no church. And so, eventually, I got to see that firsthand. We moved across the country so that my dad could pastor another church, and he did a phenomenal job. He brought back the church from the brink of closing down to being a massive success. And all of the people that were invested in that church for so long, they just breathed a sigh of relief and they said, finally, I know that this church is on the upswing. Everything's good. And so I can feel good with that. And now I can move on. And so all those people that were so invested in the church left because they were burnt out. And so, without them, why even have a church? All of the people that were still going were basically new. So the church shut down. And you see, that's the danger of that. That if you're constantly needing these people who really want to be involved, who are really invested, well, maybe they get burned out. And once they get burned out, that's it. But that's not the story I want to talk about today. The story I want to talk about today is after that. My dad's doing other stuff, became chaplain, all good. And so we were going to a different church. He was not the pastor. But we knew the pastor, and we got to know him really well. He was a fun, energetic guy. Not really pastor training, not really pastor material. He kind of knew that, right? But he was a worship leader. And oh man, was he charismatic. And he was fun. And he just had a heart that really loved God. And so, yeah, he wasn't the best at theology. He wasn't, the most amazing in terms of sermons and all that stuff. But everyone loved him because he was a real guy who really loved God. And so what happened was, because he was so on fire for God, everyone around wanted to be too. They saw how fun it was for him, how energized he was, and they took to it like that. And so then everyone was wanting to volunteer. Everyone was just wanting to get involved. I too got involved, right? I ended up being, I ran the slides. So I was kind of like the media person. There was a guy on the soundboard, and then there was me on the slides, and I got pretty good at it, especially with the songs, because like I said, he was more of a worship leader, so he would be singing and doing his thing, and I'd like sync it up with the song real good, and everyone would tell me they knew when I was doing it because it paced so well. It felt great. It felt great being there and doing something for other people, right? To increase their experience and give to them. And that's what everyone got, that feeling. Everyone had that feeling because there's so much life in that church. But one day, this guy came along. And he was a pastor. He was one of the pastors at the mega church that our pastor used to be the worship leader of. So they knew each other. And this guy didn't work at that mega church anymore. You want to know why? It's because he cheated on his wife, divorced her, and then married the mistress. So, not the best role model, right? You can definitely understand why he wasn't pastor anymore. So he's like, hey, well, I'm not pastor, so why don't I help you out and give you some advice? Now, there were already some pastors, retired, in the church that were giving the main pastor some advice. They weren't pastors of the church. They were just ex-pastors, retired, giving advice. My dad was one of them. He wasn't pastor anymore. Also, he wouldn't be pastor of this church because of different denominations. So, hush, hush. Can't be too involved. But yeah, it was like he took the advice. And then things started to change. And so what happened was, one of the things that changed was a logistical thing. It was something that just made sense, right? That when you have communion, right? One of the most awkward parts of communion is how do you get communion to all of the people that are kind of like facilitating the service, right? And I was one of those guys. I was doing the slides, right? So when the band is singing the song during communion, well, I'm there with the slides, moving things along. Guys there with the sound moving things along, making sure everything's okay. And so we were kind of like the support team while things happened. And so the logistical solution for this was to have all of those people have communion separately at the beginning of church. And so, it's just a logistical thing. It felt so weird. It felt so weird to not have communion with your community, right? To feel isolated and separated, but it was like, but whatever, right? It's just whatever. It wasn't the worst thing that he had been doing at the time. There's so many other weird things that was going on. It's just like, whatever. Who cares? But then one day, this new pastor, he had started picking up the slack, as it were. And so he was doing some services, right? And so one day he was giving a message. And I was doing the slides, and I have to pull up the verses. And one of the funny things about our spontaneous fun pastor was that, when he's pulling up verses, sometimes he doesn't tell us ahead of time. So I have to quick Google it, throw it on the screen. And so I had to really pay close attention whenever the pastor was talking. So this new guy, he gave a sermon that was just so unacceptable. He had a different view of Christianity than I did. We're different denominations. Okay, right? It didn't really come up with the fun pastor because he wasn't a theology guy, right? And so it wasn't about that. But this guy, he said, "Oh, I know theology. I'm gonna teach all of you." And boy, did my family, myself included, not agree with his theology. But one service particularly stood out to me because it showed what kind of man he was. He gave a whole sermon. There's this passage, I think it's in Romans, where Paul's talking about, hey, the logistics of communion, right? Where, there's going to be some people, because, back in the early days of the church, communion wasn't just, snack time in the middle of the service, right? It was a full-on meal, and then people would come and, it's lunchtime, right? They would do it at lunch, and, sometimes you're a little bit late. And so an issue cropped up that some people would get there early because they're less busy, right? And then they'd be partying it up. Hey, we got some bread, we got some wine, let's get this going. And so they just get completely lit. And then by the time those people who were like, working and they're like, oh, I finally got a break, lunch break, let's head on over, get some communion with my Christian brothers and sisters. And they'd get there and it was all gone. Because those people who came there early just gorged themselves on all that stuff. And it's like, yeah, you want to have a fun time, but this is excessive, right? And so, essentially, what he ended up saying was, this, morally questionable pastor, what he said was, and this is exactly why everyone's supposed to take communion at the same time. Now, I don't think that's what that passage says. But regardless, if he believes that, and I'm sitting there saying, dude, you just gave me communion 30 minutes ago. Completely separate from everyone else. Like, it's one thing to do that, and it's another thing to read the Bible, the holy book, and say, hey, what I just did was perfectly wrong. It was exactly what I shouldn't have done. But guess what? I'm not gonna change. And so, after that, I was like, dude, this guy's just bad news. And my whole family knew it. And so we tried to let the good pastor know. I mean, it's his church, not this guy's church. This guy just showed up one day. But he was like, no, he knows what he's doing. I'm going to trust him. So we're like, whatever. We trust you. We don't trust him. But if this is what you want to do, then we'll do it with you. So now remember, I was doing the slides, right? And I was actually teaching the son of the fun pastor how to do the slides because, I did it so well. And we wanted to have more people that knew how to do exactly that. So that way they could cycle through, right? You can take turns. So not every Sunday, every time they're relying on me. Maybe my family goes on vacation. Who does it, right? Like that kind of stuff. And so I remember one day we were just listening to something, and we're listening to this guy, the pastor's message, the sleazy one, and he was just not making sense. It was just bad. And at this point, I'm in high school, but I'm old enough to drive. So my parents and I drove separately because I had to get there early to set up the slides. So this guy's just talking nonsense. Like, oh my gosh, how far are you stretching this book? Like, what are you saying? And so eventually what I did was I walked out. I was doing the slides. I was part of the service. And I just walked out. Now, the guy that I was training, he filled in because I was like, I'm just going to step away for a second. But then I sat in the car for a bit. I'm like, oh my gosh. I got to get back in there. I got to do this. But I listened to some music. I felt a little bit better. Then I walked in, and in the entryway, they had a little TV so you could see the slides and, like hold your baby or whatever, kind of like a cry room situation. So in the entryway, I saw that. I saw what verse he was on, and I listened for a couple seconds, and I'm like, no, no, I don't want this. And so I drove home. That's what I did. Do you know what my dad said when he got home? My pastor Dad, well, not at the time, but, he'd been pastor for years. And you know what he told me? He said, if I didn't need to borrow my friend's weed whacker, I would have done the same thing. And that's kind of how the story went. That this guy ruined so many people's connection to the church. Now, that same year where I walked out, I was going off to college, so, we left. And so I didn't get to see this part. And I'm kind of glad. But what ended up happening was that sleazy pastor, well, he would talk to, the good pastor, the fun pastor. And eventually came up that, the fun pastor, he was having some impure thoughts about a woman. Now, the fun pastor's married, he has kids. He knows that's wrong. But the sleazy pastor, he sees opportunity. And so he says, oh, you're having these thoughts. You haven't done anything, but sure. But still, don't you know in the Bible it says, hey, even your thoughts are sins, right? And it's like, yeah, that's true. But what he did was he had that good pastor stand up in front of the entire congregation and admit to his impure thoughts. That's a private struggle. You say that kind of things in confessions and stuff, but not to the congregation when nothing happened. But because he had to say it in front of the congregation, then that sleazy pastor slipped in again and said, oh, well, maybe you just want to get divorced and, marry the new one, right? And so that's what he did. And so that good man got manipulated out of his family, out of his marriage, out of his church. And the point I'm making here is not that one evil guy used political maneuvering to ruin a church and ruin a man's life, ruin a family. That's not even the point here. The point is for you to see the motivation. Because that political maneuvering, it wasn't merely to do harm. It's not like the sleazy guy hated the good guy. He just wanted what he had. So, that sleazy guy, he wanted to be the reason for the church's success. And in order to do that, he had to remove everything else. All of the people left. My parents said that he even changed the name of the church. He changed the name of the church, and pretty much no one that had gone to that church with us for years, pretty much none of those people were still around. They all left. Because of course they did. And this is the point. That with Christianity, this is obvious. We are taught that the people are the body of Christ. That the church is what does Christ's work in this world. And what this man did was he separated the body of Christ from Christ. He used bad theology. He used manipulative tactics, lies and deceit, logistics. And so, the people that had built that church, that made it into something worth being at, those people they were no longer needed. We didn't need volunteers for this or that. We didn't need to do this or that program. We didn't need to have a youth group or a Sunday school or this or that or whatever. We didn't need to have all of these different technologies or all of these different programs or all of these different things. We didn't need any of that. And so, for logistics, it all stopped. It was all removed. But that's exactly what made that church a home. That's exactly what made those people a community. And so, this jerk, this sleazy guy, he took all of this stuff from all these people. He broke everyone apart. And all he had to do was he didn't have to yell or rage or steal or any of that. All he had to do was separate people. All he had to do was say, "Don't worry, this isn't your job. If we wanted someone to do it, we'd hire someone. No need to volunteer, no need to do anything. We got it." And that's the issue with politics. Is that politicians say those same things. No need to get involved. It's not your job. No need to do anything. No need to solve your problems. Don't worry about it. If we wanted it done, we'd hire someone. That's what politicians say. And so you don't think it's your prerogative. It's not your job to fix the roads, to have an after-school program, to teach kids. It's not your job. Leave it to the people whose job it is, right? What, you see a problem? Don't worry. It is someone else's job, and you just let them do it. Let them handle it. It's their job, after all. Did you want to take away someone's job? And that's the issue here. Is that when you say, it's not my job, it's not my thing, when that happens, you break a community. You separate one person from another to the point where now neighbors don't even know each other. They don't talk. They don't do anything. And the reason is because it's not their job. If it were their job, oh man, they would get to know everybody, right? But it's not their job, so whatever. It is what it is. They're those guys, and they don't bother me, so we're all good. And that's the issue. That's how it goes. All you have to do with a community to ruin it, to break it apart and make it unrecognizable, is to tell people it's not your job. It's not your responsibility. It's someone else's. Don't take it all on yourself. People get burned out that way. Just let go. And once a couple people let go, it's gone. And that's my story. Hopefully you enjoyed it. See you on the next one.